Am I the only one who's been looking at Kimi and just thinking to myself saying, you know what? This character design seems awfully familiar to Toru Honda. I'm wondering if this is going to be a character very similar. And what we ended up getting wasn't like the complete opposite, but rather, if Toru's pure adorableness and selflessness, I mean, she's like slightly more evil, just a little more manipulative. She knows how to be the seductress, as it's called in the episode. And it's such an odd thing to look at a character that you kind of look at a visual glance, like, oh, Toru, wait, that's not how Toru would act. This is something else, especially considering Yuki is kind of like being surrounded by someone who is very, on a physical level, similar to Toru, despite separating himself from her. So Yuki and her could have time alone, as he basically hates himself and hates how he judges himself, comparing himself to everyone else that he sees. It's such an interesting contrast, and just jumping into an episode where you just hear Yoon Yoon, you're thinking to yourself, what is Fruits Basket getting us into? And this was honestly a very different feeling episode. In terms of the dramatic, it's pretty much right at home with what we've come to expect, but a majority of the episode, it functioned in a lot of ways similar to the early content in Season 1 in terms of how the school is functioning. But it's clear as day that Yuki's arc is kicking off, and Yuki's character development is going to skyrocket, and I can only imagine what he's going to look at by the time either the story ends or maybe this arc ends or something to that nature. I saw some people say that this episode didn't hit it exactly the way they wanted. The more dramatic stuff they absolutely loved, but a lot of the more simple moments just weren't their cup of tea, and that's totally fine. For me, I loved this episode of Fruits Basket. Shocker, I know Brandon loves an episode of Fruits Basket, who would have guessed it. But I could understand maybe because there was a lot of like joke-like moments. There was actually a lot of artistic choices for the dramatic and just honestly even the silly moments. There was some that I don't remember seeing before, and if we have, it's been quite a while because, well, we have been in the dark and serious territory for quite some time, so we haven't had room to have some of these funny little jokes where the art style and just the presentation overall just shifts to something that looks more like a webtoon or something from a comic from North America, and it's just absolutely hilarious to see it pop out. But this episode primarily put the focus on, of course, our boy Yuki, who is, of course, the student council president. We have Kakeru, who is the vice president, who, honestly, loving his character. We're going to dive into him quite a bit. And then, of course, Kimi. And Kimi's a character who I don't know how to feel. I don't think this is going to be a character that I'm going to fear and loathe, but it's also a character I'm not sure if I'm going to love and adore. I think she's going to be one of those characters who's kind of down the middle. I'm really glad she's a part of the show, but I don't know if I necessarily consider that type of persona one I'd want to associate with outside of maybe just the days, the activities, and things like that you have to, like if you're on a student council and, well, she's part of it and she has to use her charms to get what she wants, including getting a new whiteboard, despite really probably not getting it in the most healthy of ways. But being the seductress, I love how she's literally called that in this episode, she manages to do so. She's someone who's just so, in a lot of ways, some of her initial lines are very similar to how Toru interacts, just a little more bubbly and not as kind of like, okay, she's not as hyper, but she has that same sort of charm going, and then you see her elbow her colleague in the stomach for basically revealing that she's not as sweet as innocent as she appears to be, and the real voice comes out, and you're like, this girl, Fruits Basket, knows how to write these multi-layered characters, because even though it may appear a little more anime and gimmicky, like, oh yeah, she has this very cute, adorable voice, but really she's kind of a little more menacing and serious, there's a lot of people who put on double faces, double personas to navigate school situations, especially if they have a cute face. Goes for guys too, don't get me wrong, that depending on how you look, you can use that to your advantage, and I'm very curious to see how much we're going to see into her psyche, because honestly, I'm excited if they dive into it, because as we've seen, they can show us any character and they're going to be interesting, and honestly, the student council is an interesting dynamic, especially for one such as Yuki, who basically, he kind of just plays the role without really cherishing himself, and the things that he does cherish, he just wants the best for them as he separates, because he just feels himself just judging and comparing, saying, oh, I wish I was them, I wish I had this, I'm so pathetic, I'm so useless, because of just how he was raised and how every time we flash back to his childhood, it's him in a dark corner, and it's absolutely sad. And it's pathetic not because he's pathetic, it's pathetic because he was put into that situation by people who should have took care of him and treated him like a person rather than just something to be locked away and to give into every will, such as Akito, which, yes, Akito is the god for the Zodiacs, but still, screw that god is all I can say, and screw whatever religion they basically are following, because this is not the god you want to follow for sure. What I really liked about this episode is once you get into the little bit of serious towards the very end of the episode, you kind of look at what you were seeing throughout the remainder of the episode, and it really puts it into perspective. Something I'm really loving is that the whole Yuki, Toru, and Kyo situation isn't just something that's done in an arc. It kind of obviously is carrying over the entire run, and it makes it feel a lot more natural and elegant, because as characters are recognizing, such as Kakeru in this episode, I wonder why Yuki isn't walking home with Toru anymore. And that's something that's really interesting to me, because originally they all three of them would walk home together, but now that he views basically Kyo as someone who makes Toru the happiest, he separated himself, because even though he wishes in a lot of ways that he could be Kyo and be in a situation like that, he realizes that's what makes Toru happiest, so he separated himself and he's just focusing on what he has to do here, navigating the school and things like that. And it's interesting how that kind of gets thrown into his face, and it's one of my favorite Yuki scenes in quite some time. Honestly, maybe one of my favorite Yuki scenes since season 1, and I know that's saying a lot, but I love how Yuki gets someone who you think is very fake and very artificial, throw it in his face, but then also says how he honestly respects who he is and wishes he could be similar to him. It's such an interesting bonding moment, because these two characters I never thought would be friends in any way, shape, and form, but honestly by the end of this episode it seems like they are, or are going to be in the very near future. Someone who reminds him of Kyo, someone who he wants to punch in his face, but is able to navigate the social situations and be able to be the president and not make any drama and things like that. But having it thrown in his face of just everything that he knows is true, it causes him to lash out. That little fight, that little bicker is something like, okay, yeah, but the kick, and I was like, okay, we're getting into some hostility that doesn't make us feel like, oh my god, my blood's boiling, I want to destroy this Akito character, things like that. No, it's general high school drama, but it feels quite mature in how it's written, because both of these characters needed that little de-stressor, that almost like the balloon was ready to pop for some time, and rather than popping the balloon, it just let out a bit of air. And doing so, I think it kind of helped both of them in the process, because both of these characters needed to really kind of examine the situation and really just admit to what they were feeling. And while I'm not going to say Yuki's arc is done, it's obviously far from it. There's still a lot to go, especially with him talking with Kyo and Toru in particular. It still feels like it was a good moment for him to start shaping up and recognizing that all he does is look at other people, put himself down, and wish he was another person, because he has such little self-worth. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with going through any sort of school situation and even into your adulthood, and it sometimes can last your entire life. For someone like him who's been as emotionally abused as himself, and the fact that he is cursed in such a way and bound to a god that is so manipulative and destructive, it's understandable why he is like this, and to have someone who may not have dealt with the exact same things as himself, but someone who reminds him of his mortal enemy, while maybe mortal enemy is not the right word anymore, but someone who is sort of a friend but also a rival in a certain way. It's really nice to see that bonding moment, because I think it probably shows to Yuki that maybe things are going to change for the better. Maybe not everything has to end with destruction and just horror. Maybe he can also talk to someone like Kyo, because this is a character he thought never he could talk to, and honestly they had a pretty great bonding moment. The fact that he said something so nice to him that he had to hold back tears of joy, it says a hell of a lot, and it'll be interesting to see what types of conversations he can have with Kyo as well as Toru in the future, because it's a remarkable step forward in my honest opinion. And that's what I love about Fruits Basket. If you take the drama and then you take all the more like mundane or simple or funny moments, the drama is like a fourth, maybe a fifth of the episode. The rest is basic mundane, yet that drama is so meaty in substance you can talk about it for 20 minutes and probably have an interesting conversation for a majority of those minutes. Yet, it just feels like there's always so much happening, and the reason it feels like that is because we're now, I think, 38 episodes into Fruits Basket, something to that nature, and it feels like everything that's came before, everything that we're speculating will come after, it feels like we take that into perspective of what we just saw. Even if we only had 2 minutes of just simple or even just really dramatic moments, we can take into consideration everything we've seen, and it makes everything feel very elegant, as if there's a clear planning and structure going on for its story and just characters in general, and that's why it's so remarkable. And characters that you can look at surface level and say, oh, they're very artificial and fake, this is clearly someone who's trying to play bubbly and nice, but really is just using her talents for her own self-gain. You can look and say, I know exactly what to assume, but as we've seen with every single character, no one is just their surface level persona, and that's why Fruits Basket has made me look at this entire student council and say, I'm not going to judge any one of you, even if your initial personality rubs me the wrong way, because what this show has taught me is to not judge a book by its cover. And that's a very basic message that I think everyone hears since childhood. Don't judge a book by its cover. But Fruits Basket really took that message and really developed it and fleshed it out in such a way that it's absolutely remarkable, and it makes you care about these characters. The reason I like the student council isn't just because Yuki's a part of it. Remove Yuki, just have this council, I would love it just as much, in my honest opinion. Yeah, I would love it in different ways for certain things for sure, like the vice president probably wouldn't interact with Yuki as much as he currently is. But every character can be interesting, and every character is going to be interesting. Like the fact that we have this quiet girl not being able to talk, and just it feels like there's such a story ready to be told there. There's such a story ready to be told with this like little bratty person wanting to challenge Yuki. There's always a story to tell, and whether we get to it or we get to it and it's a short one or a long one, it always feels like the story is going to be interesting at the end of the day. And that's why when I see goofy moments or simple moments, I'm just enjoying it because it feels like a world. It feels like real people, and not everything's always just going to be just destruction and thunderstorms. Sometimes it's going to be a general school day. It's nice to have a couple of moments to just kind of de-stress, especially considering everything that we have seen in this anime to date. But as always, I pass the torch over to you. What did you think of this honestly different feeling episode of Fruits Basket, but also slightly familiar, and where do you think Yuki's character growth could go in the future after everything that happened towards the end of the episode? Do let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button if you happen new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.